I am nothing like Family Guy. When I make jokes, they are inherent to a story. Deep, situational, and emotional jokes based on what is relevant and has a point.
Because this is the episode where we rip on Family Guy. And so that's what most people want to talk to us about, going, do you really not like Family Guy, or are you? And I just want to say for the record right now, like, we've seen Family Guy. We do hate it. We do hate Family Guy.
Really, Matt Groening is a friend of mine. I have nothing but warm feelings about that show.
What about South Park?
They can go to hell.
South Park versus Family Guy is one of television's longest rivalries. It all began in 2006 when South Park aired episode 1 of their two-parter titled Cartoon Wars. Both of these episodes are actually banned now. And no, it's not because of Seth, he's not that petty.
Ow, 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 ow.
Ow! Trey! Come on, Matt. Just relax and let it happen.
This is a deleted scene from a season 6 Family Guy episode. Seth MacFarlane probably realized a gay joke wasn't very effective considering these two have literally made out in a feature-length film. Okay, we're already getting off topic. Why are these two episodes banned? Well, the idea came from a 2005 controversy. A Danish newspaper published 12 editorial cartoons depicting Muhammad, the prophet or founder of Islam. This sparked protests around the world, and some escalated into full-blown riots and even violence carried out by extremist groups. This is because in Islam, visually depicting Muhammad, especially in a comedic context, is considered blasphemous. Even a show like South Park wouldn't dare depict Muhammad. Oh, what's that? They did? All the way back in 2001? He's also in this intro that was used for years. So yeah, Super Best Friends had years of reruns, Muhammad was put in an intro for years, not a speck of controversy. Fast forward to 2006, Matt and Trey want to do another Muhammad episode, except this time, it's not okay. But Trey Parker tried really hard to make this happen.
As we were making the show, the argument was still going on with Comedy Central. We were still saying, well, can we show Muhammad this way? Can we show him that way? Can we show a guy that says, I'm Muhammad, and then we say he's not, and all of this stuff.
Comedy Central wasn't budging, so they did the next best thing. They used satire, social commentary, and crafted us a brilliant two-parter on censorship, extremism, and fear. But of course, 95% of people watching were just extremely hyped that South Park called out Family Guy. So in this video, we'll be exploring these two episodes, the relationship between South Park and Family Guy, as well as the effect this censorship still has, even 20 years later. I've been wanting to cover these episodes since I first created my channel, so I hope you guys enjoy. Here is Cartoon Wars.
You think that's bad? Remember when I auditioned to be David Hasselhoff's car?
The episode begins in a very chaotic way, with Randy in a full-blown panic. This scene pretty much looks like the start of every zombie apocalypse movie ever. It's just perfect how this guy is holding toilet paper. If COVID taught us anything, it's that when the world is in crisis, you better be damn sure that you have your toilet paper hoarded up. Most of the town rushes to the community center to get to safety, as if we needed any more reason to hate Butters' parents.
Oh my God, Steven, we've left Butters!
We can't go back out there, Linda. It's too late for him.
The boys still have no idea what's going on by this point when Randy breaks the news to them. He tells them that a cartoon is about to air on American television with the Muslim prophet Muhammad as a character.
So?
Stan's reaction here is not far off from how most of the world felt when they learned about the Muhammad cartoon controversy. Randy goes on to say that Muhammad is sacred to the Muslim people and that ever since those cartoons were published in Denmark, the rules have changed. So right off the bat, they're already referencing the Danish cartoons that caused all this outrage and gave them the idea for this episode. Here's what Matt Stone had to say about the controversy.
It was so strange to watch a new taboo being basically formed. And that taboo being formed by people getting threatened by violence if they were to put Muhammad in their cartoon.
Gerald asks Randy which cartoon would be so insensitive to have Muhammad as a character.
Family Guy!
The town starts asking each other why Family Guy would do something so terrible, and Randy starts going off saying how Family Guy doesn't care who they insult, they just care about their precious money. They're using Family Guy as the template, but they satirize their own show a lot throughout this episode as well. Stan finds this whole thing ridiculous, wondering if people are actually going to be that pissed off about a cartoon. Someone gets the TV working, and we see a news report on the situation. We learn that the announcement of Muhammad being shown on Family Guy has already sparked chaos all over the Middle East.
Muslim terrorist al-Zawahiri made this statement.
بقطع المعونات
First of all, the fake subtitles are one of the funniest parts of this episode. This was a real guy though. Al-Zawahiri was pretty much bin Laden's right hand. He was seen as the brains of Al-Qaeda and their main strategist. After bin Laden's death in 2011, Zawahiri became Al-Qaeda's leader, until he got wrecked by a drone strike in 2022. I always wonder if he or bin Laden ever saw these episodes, which sounds crazy at first. But when you realize they found terabytes of media on his hard drive, it's really not impossible that at least someone at his compound saw these episodes. I mean, the dude was playing Final Fantasy, Counter-Strike, GTA, and watching documentaries about himself. It could have been his kids, obviously, but it's a lot funnier to imagine Osama bin Laden watching Chicken Little. Anyways, Linda asks what they should do next. The town is obviously expecting some type of terrorist attack, and Randy gives us one of his best lines in the entire show.
If we're still alive in the morning, then we'll know we're not dead.
They wake up the next morning and realize everything is fine. Apparently, Fox Network decided to censor Muhammad at the last second. The boys decide to go to Kyle's house to see how Family Guy censored this. Kyle apparently TiVos every episode of the show, which of course disgusts Cartman. We then get to see what Family Guy looks like in the South Park universe.
You think that's bad? Remember when I auditioned to be David Hasselhoff's car? Hey there, Knight Rider.
After those bad guys, Kit!
So in the very first clip, we can already see what South Park is making fun of. Gags or cutaways. This is the main reason Matt and Trey hate Family Guy, and they certainly aren't hiding it.
There's one thing we always try to avoid in South Park is gags. No matter what you're talking about and how deep of an issue or whatever character arc or whatever it is, they're just throwing out a gag. And it's just like, yeah, and then he says this, and it's like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
After some more cutaways, we get to see the censored clip of Muhammad.
You mean like the time you had tea with Muhammad?
Come on, Muhammad, let's get some tea.
Try my Mr. T.
It's just great how accurate that is to a Family Guy joke. Like, is it funny? Yeah. Is it also one of the stupidest jokes ever? Also, yeah. The boys are very confused after watching the clip, and none of them understand why this is a big deal. Except, plot twist, Cartman thinks it's a very big deal.
How would you feel, Kyle, if there was a cartoon on television that made fun of Jews all the time, huh?
One of South Park's best meta jokes right here. Kyle's parents catch them watching Family Guy and they immediately start freaking out, even smashing their TV, instead of just turning it off. This scene is to highlight another main point of these episodes, that being fear, which we'll talk more about later. Kyle's mom thinks that the boys are just uneducated and says that they all need Muslim sensitivity training, which just so happens to be taught by Mrs. Garrison. Personally, I can't think of anyone better for the job.
Yes, them all to death. How about we get rid of all the Mexicans?
Well, yeah, but at least I got rid of all those damn
Okay, maybe not, but this should at least provide some great content for us. The lesson starts off with Garrison attempting to explain why Muslim people are so upset about Muhammad being shown. Garrison then explains that Muslims cannot have sex before marriage, and that normally this would be okay in religion, except that Muslims also can't
jack off.
After that, Garrison tops it off by saying Muslim people live in sand.
Now put yourself in the shoes of a Muslim. It's Friday night, but you can't have sex and you can't jack off. There's sand in your eyes and probably in the crack of your ass, and then some cartoon comes along from a country where people are getting laid and mocks your prophet.
Cartman then calls out Garrison for being ignorant and racist. By this point, every South Park fan watching knows that Cartman is up to something. He's arguably more racist and intolerant of certain religions than Garrison is. So to see him suddenly showing this much empathy towards Muslim people, it's pretty obvious he's up to no good. We're not forgetting the time he said this.
Not all Muslim people are terrorists.
No, but most of them are.
The school randomly calls for an emergency assembly, and we're told that the Family Guy episode was only part 1, and that next week they're gonna air part 2 with Muhammad uncensored. This is Matt and Trey foreshadowing their own show. Keep in mind, Cartoon Wars was only ever supposed to be 1 episode. Matt and Trey only made it a 2-parter because Comedy Central refused to show Muhammad.
Even as we made this whole first part, we still were in the argument, and that's why we decided to make it a 2-parter, because we're like, well, they're still not letting us show Muhammad, so let's make it a 2-parter and we'll argue about it for another week.
The news report goes on to say that the Family Guy writing staff has demanded that Muhammad be shown without censorship. We then see that more riots and violence are breaking out, and we get another Al-Zawahiri clip of him trashing Family Guy.
حتى يدركوا أبعاد المؤامرة الأمريكية ضدهم.
Using a literal terrorist to tell your own thoughts about Family Guy is something only South Park could pull off. After the assembly, Cartman is trying to rally up the boys to help him get the episode of Family Guy pulled. At first, Kyle is against this. He says that the writers shouldn't be intimidated by fear. Cartman, being an expert-level manipulator, starts talking about all the people who could get hurt if this episode goes on air.
If 10 people die because Family Guy just had to have their little joke, will you still think it's funny?
This conversation appears to make Kyle second-guess his opinion. Later that night, he even has a horrifying dream about his little brother Ike becoming a victim of terrorism. As Cartman is preparing to leave to Los Angeles to stop the episode, Kyle rolls up to tell him that he thinks he's right, and he wants to help Eric get the episode pulled.
People can really get hurt, and a joke just isn't worth that.
Kyle genuinely believes here that Eric is being sincere. Also, can we just talk about them planning to ride their big wheels all the way there? I love when they have these deep conversations and then South Park reminds us that they're literally 4th graders.
All right, let's roll.
Kyle mentions that they have 6 days to get the episode pulled. If they keep their stops to a minimum, they should make it in time. Cartman slips up during the conversation and mentions that just a few weeks from now, Family Guy will be off the air forever. Eric goes on to explain that if you get one episode pulled, it will start a chain reaction, and anyone offended will be able to stop an episode until the show eventually dies. Kyle says that he still likes Family Guy and just wants this one episode pulled.
You should like that show. Your sense of humor is just like Family Guy. Don't you ever compare me to Family Guy.
At this point, Kyle realizes the truth. Everything Eric has said about Muslims or free speech has been a complete manipulation tactic to get Family Guy off the air forever. Eric goes on a rant about how he's tired of being compared to Family Guy. This is Nat and Trey speaking through Cartman, if you couldn't tell. Eric continues his rant about how his jokes are better. They're inherent to a story, deep, emotional jokes based on what's relevant and actually has a point. You might be thinking by now that South Park has some sort of childish jealousy towards Family Guy, and you would be absolutely right in thinking that. They even admit it themselves.
It's like the Justin Timberlake thing. It's like when you're a musician and you're doing your stuff and you're working hard and you're trying to do art, and then Justin Timberlake comes along and just rakes in all the cash and everyone thinks he's awesome. You're like, dude, come on, that's not that good. But that's how sort of everyone in this town feels about Family Guy. And again, it is like this childish jealousy too, because it's like, come on, our stuff's cooler.
Yeah,
but
it totally is childish because Family Guy gets like 4 times the ratings of us.
Kyle comes to the realization that Eric used fear to make him stop believing in free speech. So now Kyle's new goal is to make sure Eric doesn't get to Los Angeles.
Well then, Kyle, I guess oh my God, is that Tim McGraw? What? Cartman!
Meanwhile, the town of South Park is trying to decide what they're going to do about the upcoming Family Guy episode. The mayor brings in a university professor to come up with a solution for how the town can stay safe. I always thought it was hilarious how fearful the town is, like some random small town in Colorado is going to be the target of terrorism. It's obviously South Park trying to satirize the global fear. I don't know, that's just always been funny to me. The professor says that the only way to stay safe from extremists is to let them know that the town has no part in what Family Guy is doing. How do they accomplish this, you might ask? Well, by putting their heads in the sand. Except, literally, taking tons of sand and burying their heads in it. This ridiculous idea causes Steven Stotch to give us a pretty out-of-character outburst. Steven tells the town that they need to do the opposite of this, and instead fight for free speech.
And if we aren't willing to risk what we have, then we just believe in free speech, but we don't defend it.
I like the sand idea. Yeah, me too. Yeah, the sand thing sounds a lot simpler.
This is probably the only time Steven has ever sounded competent, like this is finally his big moment to be a respected character. Then it gets immediately shut down. Underrated moment of this episode for sure. The next scene shows us an epic high-speed chase of Kyle trying to stop Cartman, where they just casually get a couple police officers to crash their car. Cartman then uses some cheesy poof tech to get Kyle off course and crash his big wheel. It cuts to the town preparing for their defense against terrorism. Stan, of course, is the only one who realizes how stupid this is, but he's forced to go through with it anyways. Jimbo realizes that the last person isn't going to have anybody else who's able to bury their head for them, meaning they will appear to be part of the Family Guy audience. Suddenly, a random guy volunteers in a pretty dramatic way to be the hero.
Who are those people?
The concluding scene shows George Bush meeting with the network president of Fox. Bush is trying to negotiate about the Family Guy episode being aired, and the Fox network president tells him that his hands are tied, and we're left with a very intense cliffhanger.
There's something about the Family Guy writing staff I think you should know.
They follow it up with a little preview of the next episode. It's hard to describe how hyped this episode was at the time. In 2006, social media was still fairly new, but if this episode aired today, it would break the internet. I still remember having debates at school with people about South Park versus Family Guy. I mean, imagine your favorite content creators beefing. Now, times that by about 1,000. That should give you a decent understanding about how people felt about these episodes. So before we get into the next episode, let's talk more in depth about the reactions to part 1. First off, Family Guy didn't have much of an immediate reaction. What I can tell you is reactions from other adult cartoons.
But after the first part aired, we got calls from people at The Simpsons saying thank you, because they actually hate Family Guy more than we do, even though they won't say it. And then we got calls from people that work on King of the Hill. They said, quote, "You're doing God's work by ripping on Family Guy."
Before Cartoon Wars, The Simpsons had their own beef with Family Guy, joking about them copying their format. When you look at it objectively, the shows are similar. Both are about working class, dysfunctional families with a drunken, dim-witted father and 3 kids. After this particular joke about plagiarism, Seth MacFarlane responded with a crazy cutaway of Quagmire basically wiping out the entire Simpson family.
Get off my wife!
Oh my god! Oh my god! You shot my homie!
A lot of people thought this joke was really unhinged and even tasteless, but Matt Groening found it funny and didn't really care at all. They would eventually get over this beef, and they even did a planned crossover episode years later.
Homer Simpson and Peter Griffin are a great team.
So I told you at the start of the video about the Family Guy deleted scene where they were gonna make a gay joke about Matt and Trey, but what else has Family Guy done when referencing South Park? Well, they've actually referenced South Park 4 times, but none of those references were really negative towards the show.
And a pretty good ribbon by those South Park guys.
Seth has given interviews where he does seem a little salty about it at times, but it's really not that deep in my opinion.
You know, because the two-parter that they did about us was very funny, and they. But then I read this article where they were just really like spitting venom at us and at our staff, and I was like, well, that's kind of lame. It's like, you know, go after me all you want, but, you know, don't go picking on writers you don't even know who are making much less money than you.
He also said this when he met Trey for the first time, which I just thought this was really funny.
I don't know them. I've met Trey maybe once or twice for all of 5 minutes. No, it's a very cordial, you know, like when Churchill and Hitler would, you know, be in the same room together.
I haven't really given any of my personal opinions on Family Guy yet, which isn't very fair. So, drum roll please. I think Family Guy is funny. I think it's good at what it does, which is entertain. It reminds me of short-form content today. Sometimes I like to be a degenerate and brainlessly scroll through Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts. Despite this, I'm always gonna think that a long-form video is better and a more respectable form of media. Family Guy is meant for quick, dumb laughs, not for clever, thought-provoking satire. Does it make me sad that there are people who actually think Family Guy is a better show than South Park? Absolutely, because it's not. And nobody will ever change my mind about that. That doesn't mean I hate the show or I think it has no place in media. I've been reading a lot of comments about South Park versus Family Guy while trying to make this video, and this comment stood out a lot to me. Family Guy, you remember jokes. South Park, you remember episodes. I remember the time Peter fell and did this for 30 seconds straight. I also remember laughing at the Cool Whip sequence, or Cool Whip sequence, for such a long time, even joking about it with my friends. Guess what? I have no idea which episodes those jokes even came from. It's not like I didn't watch a good amount of Family Guy either. I watched it a lot, probably in my top 5 background shows. To me, South Park is just more memorable, better at storytelling, and overall more thought-provoking. With that being said, I think we're ready to move on to part 2. If you've been enjoying the content so far, I'd appreciate it if you check to see if you're subscribed. Either way, here is Cartoon Wars Part 2.
And now, the thrilling conclusion of Cartoon Wars will not be seen tonight, so that we can bring you this Terrence and Phillip television special.
Okay, so I think when this episode first came out, a lot of people didn't get this reference. Back in the season 1 finale of South Park, they hit fans with a cliffhanger. Who was Eric Cartman's father? They made fans wait weeks, and instead of answering that question, they trolled their entire fan base with a Terrence and Phillip episode. Matt and Trey thought this was hilarious, but it actually pissed off a lot of people. They thought it would be funny to make people think they were getting trolled again, a double troll, if you will. This opening scene, however, actually ties into Cartoon Wars in a pretty interesting way. Terrence and Phillip wanted to show Muhammad on their show before Family Guy, but they of course end up getting censored by CBC. They argue with the network president, but he believes there's no way that Family Guy will actually go through with it, and guarantees someone is on their way to stop Fox Network right now. We of course know who that someone is. Cartman rides straight into the Fox building and demands he needs to speak to the president of Fox Network right away. He tells the lady at the front desk all of his concerns about Family Guy showing Muhammad, and she tells him to wait in line. We meet another kid who wants Family Guy off the air, Bart Simpson. So Matt and Trey never actually planned to put Bart in this episode, but after getting calls and even flowers from the Simpsons team, they thought it'd be hilarious to imply that they hated Family Guy too. And honestly, at the time, they kind of did. Cartman starts talking with Bart, trying to figure out what his plan is to get Family Guy off the air. Bart doesn't really have a well thought out plan, so Eric tells him his plan, that he's gonna use the whole Muhammad situation to scare the network into pulling the episode.
I'm going to use fear to get them to do what I want.
Isn't that like terrorism?
No, it isn't like terrorism. It is terrorism.
Bart thinks that he can pull off that plan, but Cartman is skeptical. He asks Bart to tell him the worst thing that he's ever done, and Bart replies by saying he stole the head off of a statue once. This is a reference to the episode The Telltale Head. It's one of the first really iconic Bart episodes, definitely a banger. After hearing this, Cartman sarcastically tells Bart that he's pretty hardcore. Then Cartman tells him the worst thing he's ever done. I think most South Park fans knew exactly what this was.
That's like this one time when I didn't like a kid, so I ground his parents up into chili and fed it to him.
Upon hearing this, Bart decides to let Cartman do the job. We finally get to see what Kyle's up to after losing his big wheel. He discovers a bunch of people with their heads buried in sand. I love how they make them look as stupid as possible with their hands sticking up like that. He wanders into the truck stop and finds a TV with a news report on. Apparently, the sand idea that was started in South Park has now spread to the rest of America, because of course it has. In this news report, we also get a statement from Osama bin Laden himself.
محمد عطا رحمه الله أن ينجز جميع العمليات خلال 20 دقيقة قبل أن ينتبه بوش وإدارته.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something he would say. Kyle runs into a guy who doesn't have his head buried in the sand, and this seems like another zombie apocalypse trope. He ends up being a fan of Family Guy, so he gives Kyle a ride to the network.
I know it's just joke after joke, but I like that. At least it doesn't get all preachy and up its own ass with messages, you know?
Another meta joke that shows us South Park is fully aware of the criticism they get. Meanwhile, George Bush is holding a press conference to announce that Fox is going through with their plan to show Muhammad. He also tells us that he learned something about the Family Guy writing staff, but it's classified, of course. He also adds that ultimately, they're protected by the First Amendment.
And what exactly is this First Amendment, Mr. President?
This scene is just peak satire. None of the journalists have ever heard of the First Amendment. They even asked George Bush why he came up with it. This must have been what Matt and Trey felt like, being told that they can't show Muhammad. We then see that Eric was able to get a meeting with the Fox executives. He tells a story under the persona of a Danish boy named Danny Pocket. I have no idea where that name came from, by the way. I tried to find out though if it was a reference or something. Maybe one of you know. Cartman's story is that his father worked for one of the newspapers in Denmark, and after showing an image of Muhammad, his building was bombed.
Poor kid.
Not only does he give them a sob story, he also uses his expert manipulation to tell the executives if people get hurt, it'll be their responsibility. The executives are actually fine with not showing Muhammad, but they tell us that if they use censorship, the Family Guy writing staff will refuse to work. They ask Little Danny Pocket if he would be willing to talk to the writing staff and tell them his story to see if he can change their minds.
Yes, and then Family Guy's as good as dead.
What was that?
I said thank you. Thank you for listening.
The next scene shows us Kyle wandering around Fox Studio looking for the main network office. He runs into Bart, who is spamming "I hate Family Guy" on the wall in chalk. He asks Bart for directions, but reveals too much about his intentions, not realizing that Bart hates Family Guy. He points him to a random janitor building, which Kyle naively believes. Let's be honest, this is a minor plot hole. Kyle isn't that stupid.
This can't be right. Cowabunga, motherfucker.
Meanwhile, Eric is being escorted to have a meeting with the Family Guy writing staff. This gives us one of the biggest reveals of all time. The Family Guy writing staff is composed of manatees. My favorite part of this reveal is that Cartman is not even surprised. He's just like, yeah, that makes sense. The staff member explains how the manatees write Family Guy. They use idea balls that each have a verb, noun, or pop culture reference. They take these balls to the other side, and when you put 5 of them together, they always make a perfect Family Guy joke.
Remember the time I won a date to Mexico with Gary Coleman?
¿Qué pasa, señores?
What you talking about, Willis?
This is such a creative jab. I mean, they've already told us through Cartman and, well, even terrorists, how they think Family Guy jokes are all interchangeable and irrelevant to the plot, but making the Family Guy writing staff literal manatees, just comedic genius here. Cartman then asks a pretty valid question. How did the manatees demand that Muhammad be shown? We're then told that when they tried to pull the Muhammad ball out of the tank, the manatees stopped working. Eric attempts to give his sob story to the manatees when he's interrupted by the staff member.
Don't you know anything about manatees? They're the only mammals that are completely unmoved by terrorist threats.
Back in the janitor's room, Bart has Kyle completely tied up. Cartman comes in to rub it in his face. Bart asks Eric if he was able to get the episode pulled yet. Eric replies that he hasn't, but he now knows a way to get the Family Guy writing staff to stop working.
That's good anger you're showing there. You see that? That's emotional character development based on what's happening in the storyline. Not at all like Family Guy.
This episode always reminds me of how underrated a character Kyle actually is. He's easily the least liked of the 4 boys. I mean, he rarely ever makes it into the top 10 in fan polls, but without Kyle, half of the plots in the show would be lacking. Cartman's best episodes often work so well because Kyle is the perfect contrast to him. The Tourette's episode, the AIDS episode, the entire Imagination Land trilogy, the more I actually break down South Park episodes, the more I like his character. Anyways, off-screen, Cartman sneaks back into the writer's room to remove a ball from the manatee tank. He uses some more manipulation to convince the network president that the manatees have stopped working because Fox gave in to them last week. Now, all they have to do is stop working to get whatever they want. The network president thinks that the manatees are just abusing the situation and showing him up, so he decides to have the Muhammad episode pulled, meaning that Cartman has succeeded.
I am God!
While celebrating his victory, he's interrupted by Kyle. Kyle used one of his iconically gay speeches to convince Bart to switch sides. Kyle tells Cartman that he's gonna make the network president realize that he's been manipulated, and then we get the most epic fight scene in all of South Park.
Let this be our final battle.
But first, a reference some people might have missed.
Yes! Let this be our final battle!
Okay, it's actually the most pathetic fight to ever happen, but it's pretty hilarious. During the fight, they end up in the King of the Hill studio. Matt and Trey did this to sort of shout them out for their reaction to part 1. Like I mentioned earlier, they were one of the shows that thanked Matt and Trey after part 1 aired. I just think little animation shoutouts like this are really cool. This whole fight sequence actually reminds me of Family Guy a lot whenever Peter fights the chicken. I'm not sure if they did that on purpose, but I wouldn't be surprised. Also, can we just acknowledge that Cartman is fighting a lot better than he usually does?
Come on! Come on!
The fight comes to an abrupt ending when Bart knocks out Cartman with his skateboard. It cuts to the network president who's about to give his orders to pull the Family Guy episode, when suddenly Kyle barges in the room in an attempt to save Family Guy. He tells the network president that pulling this episode could be the end of the show forever. Cartman interrupts this conversation by sucker punching Kyle, and the network president is torn about what he should do. Kyle represents free speech, and Eric represents fear and censorship. But Cartman makes it easy and pulls a gun on him. He resorts to violence to get his way. Or, in other words, terrorism. This doesn't stop Kyle from trying though. He acknowledges that people can always get hurt. That's how terrorism is. But if you give in to those threats, then you're allowing terrorism to work.
If you don't show Muhammad, then you've made a distinction between what is okay to poke fun at and what isn't. Either it's all okay, or none of it is.
This is one of the most powerful scenes in any animated media I've ever seen. And it's pretty ironic that an episode with this message is currently banned from streaming services. Matt and Trey have always fought for what Kyle is saying in his speech here. Either it's all okay, or none of it is. Thanks to Kyle's words, the network president is finally able to make his decision.
Family Guy goes on air as planned. Uncensored.
It cuts to the Family Guy episode, and just as Muhammad is about to be shown, we see this. Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network. A lot of people were confused by this and thought it was some type of bit. No, Matt and Trey put Muhammad in the scene. There's no gimmick here. Comedy Central just refused to put him on their network. I'd also like to remind people that they weren't being threatened by violence. A lot of people confused these episodes with 200 and 201. In the airing of those episodes years later, Comedy Central, Matt and Trey were all threatened by extremist groups. That wasn't for Cartoon Wars. I just want people to be aware of the difference here. Was Comedy Central scared of potential violence? Most likely. But Matt and Trey were willing to fight for free speech, and this episode shows us that. Alright, let's finish this banger of an episode. It cuts to George Bush, who just finished watching the Family Guy episode, and he acknowledges that it wasn't even that bad. Suddenly, they get a call that says the terrorists are retaliating. What is their retaliation? Well, making fun of Americans, George Bush, and Jesus Christ.
Would you like me to crap on you, Mr. Bush?
I actually like how they use Jesus in this, showing the hypocritical double standard that exists. They even comment on this part.
And this is where we kind of agree with like the super Christian. It really is open season on Jesus. Like you can do whatever you want with Jesus. But
because you're scared of them blowing you up, you can't make fun of the Muslims.
Yeah, you can't make fun of Muhammad.
After their retaliation of showing America defecating all over each other, we get the perfect ending scene.
دخول هذه المجالس العلمانية باتفاقات الاستسلام بين السلطة وإسرائيل.
These episodes are just peak South Park, the perfect mixture of satire, social commentary, along with calling out a fellow animated TV juggernaut. They're highly rated on IMDb, so it seems most fans feel similar. It's really just a tragedy that you can't legally stream these episodes anymore. Notice how I said legally. You can definitely find them on the internet if you're motivated. Feel free to leave your guys' thoughts about these episodes. As always, thank you for watching.